The wind was sharp and cold that morning, sweeping across the naval training beach like it wanted to push every candidate back home. 180 men stood in tight formation, their faces tight with tension. Among them, just one stood out. Not because of how she looked, but because she didn't belong. Lieutenant Sarah Monroe stepped forward without flinching as the instructor barked orders. The others had already begun murmuring. She could feel it without hearing a word. Their eyes trailed her like she was a walking joke. One man laughed as she entered the water. Another elbowed his buddy and shook his head. They didn't hide it. Sarah didn't react. The waves crashed around her boots, ice cold and biting, but her face stayed blank. While others gasped and cursed at the cold, she walked deeper, letting the surf rise to her waist. No hesitation. No drama. Behind the formation, one of the senior instructors leaned toward a colleague. She won't last a week. They all thought the same thing. This wasn't a place for women. Not this woman. But what none of them knew, what none of them could have imagined, was that Lieutenant Sarah Monroe had already survived something much worse than this. Something no training, no rulebook, and no number of push-ups could prepare you for. At 34, Sarah Monroe didn't carry herself like someone out to prove a point. She moved with quiet purpose, steady and sharp. Her uniform was crisp, her boots worn from real terrain, not just drills. Her ponytail was tight, not because it looked good, but because it stayed out of the way. She wasn't flashy, and she didn't smile much. But she had presence, the kind that made people look twice without knowing why. On the outside, she was just another officer. Inside, she carried a whole different world. The night before training began, she sat alone in a converted storage room. It was small, cold, and impersonal. But she unpacked with the calm of someone who'd lived in far worse. Her gear was lined up with surgical precision. Everything folded, checked, and rechecked. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of peace in the preparation. Inside her footlocker, tucked beneath her clothes, was a photograph. 4 people stood in combat gear, dusty and exhausted arms slung around each other. One of them was her, younger, smiling with a light in her eyes that didn't live there anymore. She stared at it for a few seconds, touched one of the faces gently with her thumb, then closed the lid. People thought she was here to break a ceiling, to be some symbol or experiment, but that wasn't it. She wasn't here to make history. She was here for something else, something heavier. She didn't talk about Syria. She didn't explain the scars hidden under her sleeves. But everything she did, the way she stood, moved, prepared, said she wasn't afraid of pain. Not anymore. And when morning came, when the instructors shouted and the cold water slammed against her skin, she didn't blink. Because Sarah Monroe wasn't just here to prove she could survive. She was here to keep a promise. The ocean wasn't just cold. It stole the breath straight from your lungs. When the command came, candidates into the surf, everyone ran, but not everyone lasted. Some tripped, some cursed. One laughed again as Sarah Monroe charged forward, her face unreadable. The first physical screening started right after. 200 push-ups non-stop. Then pull-ups until arms gave out, followed by miles on soft sand with gear that grew heavier with every step. The instructors circled like hawks, calling out anyone who faltered. Especially her. Chief Petty Officer Hayes stopped right in front of Sarah. He stared down as she pushed through her reps. Her form was perfect. Didn't matter. These are garbage, Monroe. Start over. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She went back to one and started again. Around her, others began to notice. No complaints, no groans. Just movement. Just steady, punishing effort. But instead of earning respect, it made her more of a spectacle. She was the show everyone watched between gasps. By mid-afternoon, the ground was littered with sweat mud and spit. Candidates collapsed on their knees, some leaning on elbows, shaking out limbs. Sarah stayed upright. She didn't stand with the others, didn't laugh, didn't join the shared misery. She stood off to the side, silent like a shadow no one could touch. When the 3-minute water break came, she didn't move. She sipped slowly, watching the horizon. She had seen harder days. She had lived through darker nights. They didn't know that yet. Hayes paced past again, eyes scanning. Still standing Monroe. "You think you've earned something already into the mud pit. All of you." The group groaned but followed. Crawling through cold mud under barbed wire wasn't training. It was punishment. And for Sarah, it was just another layer. Team assignments came next. 7 per boat crew. Sarah got Team 5. As soon as her name was read, someone muttered under their breath, "Great. We got the girl." Rodriguez, tall and built like a linebacker, looked at her like he'd just been insulted. Their drills were sloppy. The boat tipped more than it rode. The team moved out of sync, fumbling through commands. Whether it was lack of chemistry or something more deliberate, Sarah couldn't tell. But she didn't raise her voice. She just adjusted, repeated the instructions. Tried again. During gear checks, Hayes inspected their boat with disgust. Team 5. Pathetic. Either your leader's failing you or you're failing your leader. Figure it out. Then he turned and walked away. The message was clear. If they failed, it would be her fault. That night, Sarah returned from the shower's hair, still damp towel slung over one shoulder. The hallway was quiet until it wasn't. 3 men stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Their stance wasn't curious. It was confrontational. "Why don't you just quit?" the biggest one asked. "Everyone knows they're not going to let a woman finish this. It's a show. You're a show." Sarah looked at each of them, calm as ever. Her voice came out even. "I'm not here to be a SEAL. I'm here to complete training." The line stopped them cold. They expected anger. Tears, maybe. What they got was clarity. And before anyone could say another word, Lieutenant Commander Parker appeared at the end of the hallway. The group scattered. Sarah walked to her room like nothing happened. Behind her, Parker watched in silence. He didn't say anything either. But his expression had changed. Long after the lights went out in the main barracks, Sarah Monroe stayed awake. Her room was quiet except for the soft scrape of fabric as she wrapped her blisters with precision. The tape moved smoothly under her fingers. She'd done this before, many times. There was no mirror to check her bruises. No one to complain to. She worked quickly, then set everything back in place. Her gear, her uniform, the way she folded her undershirt. It all followed a system. It wasn't about neatness. It was about control in a world that never gave any. She opened her footlocker and paused. The photo was still there, still tucked beneath her shirts. 4 faces, 3 no longer alive. Her thumb rested briefly on one smile in the corner, then withdrew. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The picture was a vow, not a memory. Across the thin wall, the sounds of male candidates filtered through. Laughter, complaints, some jokes, camaraderie. That glue that held most people together through this kind of hell. Sarah didn't have that glue, but she had grit. She had ritual. And she had reasons they couldn't imagine. She lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. She wasn't thinking about the next test. She was remembering the last promise she ever made. The classroom lights hummed above them as the projector clicked to life. Today's topic, failed extractions. A map of a remote region in Syria filled the screen. The instructor spoke in a dry tone, listing what went wrong, why people died. Sarah didn't move, but something shifted. 4 men went in. 1 came out. The image changed to a top-down satellite view. The terrain looked familiar to Sarah. Too familiar. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers gripped the edge of her notebook just a little tighter. The instructor went on. Miscommunication. No backup. A 72-hour delay in rescue. 1 survivor. Rodriguez, seated nearby, noticed Sarah's hand. Her knuckles were white, her posture stiff. When she realized he was watching, she loosened her fingers and turned a page calmly. Nothing in her face gave it away, but Rodriguez had seen something. He leaned slightly toward her as the class ended. "You knew about that mission, didn't you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. Later, when she stepped out into the sunlight, she didn't look back at the building, but something in her had reopened. The past wasn't buried. It was waiting, and she just walked past its grave. The morning was colder than usual, the kind of cold that crept into your joints and stayed there. The drill was simple boat drills in freezing surf. Team 5 was finally starting to function barely. Sarah called commands with calm clarity. They moved faster now. Not perfect, but better. Then Evans stumbled. At first no one noticed. He was strong a swimmer, but his steps slowed, his head hung low. His lips had turned the wrong color. Sarah saw it instantly. She moved toward him without hesitation, steady, but fast. By the time they reached the beach, he collapsed. He was shivering violently, his gear tangled. Sarah dropped beside him, her voice shifting. Medical voice, sharp and exact. Hypothermia, moderate to severe. She barked instructions. One candidate froze. The other backed away. She removed his wet jacket and reached into her own pack. Dry clothing. A thermal wrap. No one else had thought to bring extra gear. She turned him gently, placed her own body against his for warmth. Chest to chest. Blood to blood. She applied pressure to redirect circulation and kept speaking to him in low, clear words. One of the instructors started to step in. The assigned corpsman paused. He watched her work. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't improvising. This was practiced, precise, and it was working. Evans coughed hard, then breathed. He blinked, eyes clearing. Sarah stayed with him until the corpsman took over. Then she stood up, wiped the sand from her knees, and walked back to her team. No words, no drama. Hayes had seen everything. He didn't say a thing, just watched her walk away. Later that night, the lights in Parker's office glowed long after the rest of the compound had gone dark. An email had arrived. Encrypted. Clearance granted. He entered the codes, slowly unsure of what he was about to see. The redacted sections of Sarah Monroe's military file unfolded like a classified confession. Syria, a botched mission. 4 went in. 1 came back breathing. Parker read slowly. Then he read again. Sarah wasn't a bystander. She was the field medic assigned to a Marine Special Operations team. She was wounded early in the fight. A bullet to her side. But she didn't stop. She kept 3 critically injured men alive for 3 days. No backup, no supplies. Just grit instinct and everything she knew. She performed field surgery with improvised tools, administered transfusions, used her own blood, carried a 200-pound man across 8 miles of hostile terrain. By the time help arrived, 2 were gone. 1 barely alive, and she was technically dead. No pulse, no heartbeat. 2 minutes, then breath returned. Parker sat back. The room felt small. This wasn't just strength. This wasn't just training. This was survival carved into bone. He printed a copy and handed it to Chief Hayes the next morning. Hayes didn't speak as he read. The file trembled slightly in his hand. That afternoon, after a brutal log PT session, Hayes walked up to Sarah in front of the entire platoon. He looked her in the eyes, then snapped to attention. His salute was sharp, deep, respectful. You've honored this class, Lieutenant. You've honored this uniform. The men around her fell silent. Not a word was said, but something shifted. Sarah Monroe was no longer the outsider. She was the standard. Graduation didn't come with fireworks. No cheering crowds. Just 18 exhausted bodies standing in formation, wearing dress uniforms, waiting for names to be called. From the original 180, they were the ones who hadn't quit. Sarah stood near the end of the line. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes were distant. She wasn't thinking about the ceremony. She was remembering the ocean, the mud, the nights alone. Every step that brought her here? Lieutenant Monroe. Her name echoed across the room. As she stepped forward, silence fell. The kind of silence that carried weight. the kind that meant people saw you differently now. Chief Hayes pinned the gold trident to her chest. His voice was low but steady. "You honor this uniform, Lieutenant." She nodded once. No speech, no smile. As the ceremony ended, the others gathered with families and teammates. Sarah stood alone by the window. Then Rodriguez appeared. He didn't say much, just stood beside her quiet. Then he spoke. "None of us would be here without you, especially me." She looked at him finally, allowing a smile. "You earned your place." He nodded. "So did you." Across the room, Evans approached. He looked uncomfortable, hands jammed in his pockets. "I was wrong about you," he said. "About a lot of things." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. The beach was almost empty that evening. The tide was pulling in slow. Sarah walked alone, her boots leaving deep prints in the wet sand. The same beach where she had stood on day one. Same water. Different woman. She stopped near the surf and knelt. Her hand pressed into the sand, firm and steady. Then she drew 3 more handprints beside hers. Not for her. For the 3 men in the photo. For the ones who never came home. She sat there a while, letting the wind move her hair. The ocean was quiet now. No commands. No shouting. Just space to breathe. "They asked me once why I never quit," she said softly. The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Truth is, I made a promise to 3 men who never got to come home, that their sacrifice would mean something. She stood slowly, brushed the sand from her palms. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden light across the beach. Her trident caught it, gleaming quietly on her chest. Whatever came next didn't scare her. She had already faced worse, and lived. They thought I'd ring the bell. Her voice was calm, steady. But I rang the bell of promise, and never once let it fall silent. Then she turned and walked up the shore, leaving 4 handprints behind side by side, and letting the tide carry the rest.